to the Jackson Center.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, where are you from, Dale?
Well, I was born in Des Moines, Iowa, and raised there. I graduated from high school right after I was 17, went to Creighton in 1 year as a pre-law student, where my counselor, a good Jesuit father, had me taking 8 hours of liturgical Latin, 8 hours of classical Greek, and so forth. And then I went into the service and finally ended up going overseas as a replacement for the 90th Infantry Division.
This would have been about what year?
This would have been at the 1944. I went in the service 43.
Right.
Went over in 44 and joined the 90th, which had gone in D-Day, but they'd gone in at Utah Beach.
Right.
And they'd had some terrible losses even before I got there. Stephen Ambrose said they suffered the heaviest casualties of any division in the European theater.
Somehow you find your way into a situation where you become an interrogator.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, after I was in the hospital at the end of the war, and I rejoined my outfit, the 90th Infantry Division, which was stationed near the Czech border. And after I was there for a while, they sent me up to division headquarters, where I was to interrogate Italian prisoners of war and Spanish prisoners of war. And as I mentioned, my interrogation of the Italian prisoners was at times kind of a farce, because I spoke a dialect from Calabria, the southern part of Italy, and the prisoners from up north didn't have any idea what I was talking about. And but the 90th Division, because it had gone in D-Day, was one of the first divisions then sent home. I didn't have enough points, so Lieutenant Strauss, who had been one of the German young 7-year-olds that had been sent to England and then to the States, was kind of my mentor, and he suggested I go to Garmisch, and I was sent there as a clerk. And while there, I met the young lady who later became my wife, and that was about 5 years later, mother of my children. And she worked with me on my German. I'd studied before. And through her, I was then, well, one of the interrogators. Oh, I should tell you where I was at. It was Civilian Internment Camp number 8 in Garmisch. And there's an interesting book written by Hans Helmut Kirsch, a novel idea on the camp, and it was Letzte Fermata, Stalag, and I believe he called it Interrogate. But while I was there, then finally, through an Eric Roll, who is one of the, although it was called CIC, actually it was an MIS unit, and through Eric, who had been with the 90th Division, and through Brigitte, I was brought into interrogation. And I started to tell Lee about my first interrogation. I was really excited, and I had a notebook, and I had questions written out, and this very handsome man came in, flowing white hair, and just a little kitchen table, 2 kitchen chairs across from each other. And I started out with Wie heißen Sie, wo wohnen Sie, wie lange waren Sie bei der Partei? And then he said, Herr Kommissar Tursi, would it facilitate the interrogation if we were to conduct it in English? I think I said, huh? But his, and maybe this would be, he was in he had been a decorated officer in World War I and then completed his education as an architect. He studied both in London and in New York at Columbia and was one of the founding directors of the Bauschule, the modernistic architect school in Germany, which Hitler closed down. He was denied his commission in World War II. He volunteered to do that. And there was suspicion of him. He was brought in. They couldn't prove it, that he and his wife, who were Swiss, had been helping Jews escape through Switzerland. But after, well, 2 weeks before the war was over, and Lee and I were talking about this, and I think this was mentioned, the people in the Air Force prison camp in Steinberg, which was south of Munich and probably about 15 miles north of Garmisch, went to him and say, well, we know you're an anti-German or something. He says, no, I think I'm a true German. I think the Nazis were the antis. And they said, whatever. They wanted him to go into the camp and make things as nice as possible because they wanted to be sure that that was done and that they would beat the Russians to do that. Well, one of the games that the Nazi sympathizers liked to play under the imposed automatic arrest categories was called Denuzifizieren, and that is to denounce. And the thing that they always thought was a home run is to denounce an anti-Nazi who was found in an automatic arrest category. And that was the gentleman I'm talking about, whose name was Wolfgang Otto. So he was denounced, and he was in the prison when I got there. I got there probably in the end of August of 45 from Weiden, where I'd been with the 90th prison camp.
What was the reason for the interrogation? Where would your report go?
The report would go back to the camp commander, right, and then could go on elsewhere. But after I had verified everything he told me, we still could not get him released.
Right.
But something on the automatic arrest category, I got there and I was still clerking when General Patton had said, Ortsgruppenleiters, which would be like a township political leader of the Nazi Party, was an automatic arrest category. Patton said, that's Nazi nonsense. The Nazis are just like the Democrats, the Republicans back home, so start releasing them. Well, they were working overnight, just doing that, and right in the middle of it, Patton was relieved of command. The new person in command rescinded his order, but the members of the Ortsgruppenleiters who were processed out were left out, and the ones who weren't processed out stayed into the camp. It's kind of comical.
How long were you there?
I was there until about February of 46.
And did you have enough points to leave then? Or
Yes, in 46.
You didn't want to stay around any longer, huh?
Well, it was tempting because by then Brigitte and I were very much involved. And it took us 5 years to get married, but that was tempting. But I had wanted to be a lawyer since I was 8. Mm-hmm. And I figured it was just time to get back, go to school. But I said I would be back in 47. When I didn't get back in 47, she thought I was just another Yankee taking advantage, and so we lost communications, and I went back in 48. We made connections again. But her help, on my German, there's no way I would have qualified under the exam, which was just an oral exam,
Right.
without her assistance.
So with your, how many interviews did you have to go through, did you think, Dale? Was there 10s, 20s?
No, actually just one of the men.
Okay.
I think Eric Roll worked me over.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, Stalag, whatever the number was, by Hans Helmut Kerst, he fictionalizes it, but a lot of it is true, and the head of the MIS unit was later involved in a scandal selling secrets to the Russians, and
Really?
he skipped, which was true, but he just changed the names. But the interrogators, I think we probably had about 8. 7 of them were Jewish refugees, most of them German, but some of them from other parts. And Eric Roll, that I mentioned, was a Romanian, and he wanted me to stay over. I could have signed over and worked with him.
Were you aware at the time of what was going on in Nuremberg?
I was hearing that,
Yeah.
but we had, among other people in our camp, we had Hitler's butler, Arturo he was called, and we didn't know whether Hitler drove him crazy or whether he drove Hitler crazy. It was interesting, but
Did you have any chance to interface with him at all?
yeah.
What was he like?
Well, he was funny, and he wanted to be humorous. He wanted to be liked, and he would get an accordion and come and play in the lunchrooms and so forth. In the camp, it was interesting. We had some survivors of the concentration camps, and the camp commander of the internal camp was a SS major, and I believe he's the one that had kept Wolfgang Otto from being interviewed any sooner.
Mm-hmm. Did he talk at all about Hitler?
I didn't spend that much time with him, but he would come in and he'd sing songs and play and he may have been playing the part, but he did a good job.
So this was an American-controlled prisoner of war
Yes,
camp.
it was a civilian internment camp for people who fell into the category of automatic arrest. Some of them were quite a bit higher, and later I think some of them were transferred to the lower Nuremberg trials.
Right, there were several of them, right?
Yeah, but there were no trials conducted in Garmisch.
You never know. Some of your stuff may have ended up in documents someplace. Then, Dale, you come back. Did you go into practice of law?
I came back, and I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I took all kinds of courses. And I was going to Drake. I'd gone to Creighton in '42. I was going to Drake, and one of my professors came up to me and said, "It's time you get out of here." He says, "You're just being a big fish in a little pond. It's time you do something." So I applied to Georgetown School of Foreign Service because I had Brigida on my mind, and Columbia School of Law. I was accepted to both, but the Jesuits at the time really didn't think the GI Bill was that hot a deal. Now Drake, which had been a very conservative Church of Christ or deal, took the GI Bill and just ran with it. They were doing well. I was disappointed in the School of Foreign Service and still had Brigade on my mind. I went down, I thought I had a lot of GI Bill time. So I thought I'd go to Switzerland to school and be close to Garmisch. And the guy there says, "Well, you speak Italian. There's this good job in Italy." And it was with Graves registration. So I took that. I spent a year there and then knew I had to get back. I had enough hours for the bachelor's degree, but I never had enough. So I went back to law school at Drake. I graduated in '51 and practiced in Des Moines for a year and a half. Then I had been stationed at Camp Carson in Colorado Springs and Camp Hale up above Leadville, which was the home of the ski troops, the 10th Mountain. But I was always in quartermaster units, and for reasons that don't make much sense today, I still felt that I should be in the infantry. My older brother, who was married and had a child, was already overseas. So I finally ended up going over that. I had to keep volunteering to do it. And I'd been stationed in Camp Carson, and it felt real well. And the asthma beginning to bother me, and that time they were treating asthma with 2 ephedrins and 1 phenobarbital. And that was the early 50s. And I was worried about the phenobarb. And Brigida wanted, by then we had been married my senior year in law school, and she liked the thought of Colorado. So we moved out there, and I practiced for about 27 years in Pueblo, which I enjoyed. I spent 4 of those years in the Colorado Senate, which I enjoyed very much. But the last 2 years, the first 2 years, we had, and I was in a Democratic Party, we had a Democratic majority in both houses and a Democratic governor. That's never been duplicated. This year they got to the closest to it. They have, for the first time, Democratic majority in both houses. Then in '80, I was appointed to the Colorado Court of Appeals. And I spent 13 years as a sitting judge, and then another 7 years as a senior judge, working with the Court of Appeals still in Denver. And I wanted out of Denver, so I went in and said, I want to retire. And the lady running it says, I'm not going to let you retire. I'll put you on leave of absence. I said, I don't care what you put me on. I'm going back to Pueblo. And that's basically when Lee's wife's cousin and I, our families had known each other for years. She was up in Steamboat and I was in Denver. We were both ready to go back to Pueblo. So we got together and got married, moved back there. I'd been there a year, and the same lady who put me on leave of absence called and said, we have a proposition that you can't turn down. You can do your 60 days or 90 days. And I said, with the local district court in Pueblo and the surrounding area, doing settlement conferences. And I said, well, I'd want to do something more. So they said, well, then you can do summary judgments. And I've been doing 106A4s. And those are fun. I sit at home. They give me the complete Westlaw for the entire country and all of the subsidiary deals. And I'm enjoying that.
This is terrific, Dale.